The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941 caught America and the Army and Navy commanders in Hawaii by surprise. The Japanese had prepared carefully for a long time for the attack. Their intelligence was good, America was not. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, a resource-rich area of China, and created the puppet state of Manchukuo. In the face of Western criticism of its actions and atrocities, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations. Relations with the United States, with which Japan had been a major trading partner, deteriorated after the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. By 1941, the US had embargoed machine tools and scrap metal, seized Japanese assets, closed American ports to Japanese ships, and subsequently in July stopped petroleum exports to Japan. Previously year, Japan had received 85% of its petroleum from US sources. By 1934, Japan had instituted an aggressive espionage campaign against the US. Japanese spy rings were already active on the west coast of the United States and in Hawaii. In 1935, Navy captain list had been broken. Some Japanese codes, including the Naval Attache Code, discovered two spies, Harry Thompson, a clerk in the Navy Department, and John Seymour Farnsworth, a former lieutenant commander. Harry Thompson was a former Navy yeoman recruited in 1934 by Lieutenant Commander Toshi Mizaki, who used to cover of a Japanese language exchange student. Thompson was persuaded to use his uniform to visit various ships in San Diego, the US Navy's main port. He gathered intelligence on ships' capabilities, engineering, gunnery, and tactical information and crews. Unfortunately for Thompson, the director of the Office of Naval Intelligence at that time took a personal interest in so-called language students like Mizaki. His suspicions were borne out when Japanese attache's coded radio message was intercepted and deciphered. Thompson was arrested in March 1936, convicted, and sentenced to 15 years of jail after Mizaki returned to Japan. John Seymour Farnsworth spied from 1933 to 1937. This is he contacted former associates to solicit documents. He obtained the publications The Service of Information and Security, which contained plans for battle information and tactics that were gathered from actual fleet maneuvers and tested by high-ranking naval officials. Raising suspicions were bragging about what he had done. Farnsworth was arrested in February 1937. A court ruled that Farnsworth and others conspired to communicate and transmit to a foreign government, to wit Japan, writings, code books, photographs, and plans relating to the national defense with the intent that they should be used to the injury of the United States. He had compromised the gunnery capabilities of every US ship. Publicity fed the popular exaggeration of Japanese espionage, which had been building for over a decade. The Japanese had recruited a British spy squadron leader, Frederick Joseph Rutland, an expert in aviation, in 1922 after moving to Japan in 1924 and providing technical assistance, which was vital to its development of aircraft carriers. He began working for Japanese naval intelligence in 1932. Back in London, Rutland was tasked to target the US West Coast in 1933 using commercial cover. The FBI was not officially informed by the British of the Rutland case until September 1939. Although may have known about him since 1935, Rutland had been described as the head of the Japanese espionage system in North America and was placed under surveillance. Under threat of prosecution in the US, Rutland returned to England in October 1941 and was imprisoned by the British the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The FBI and Office of Naval Intelligence attempted a double-agent operation against the Japanese in 1941. Between March and June, the operation targeted a Japanese intelligence ring that had 15 agents on the West Coast and in Hawaii. A critical tip came in March when Al Black, a US citizen, told the Office of Naval Intelligence in Los Angeles that an old acquaintance, Torachi Kono, had asked him to spy for Japan. Torachi tasked Black to collect intelligence on Pearl Harbor through a telephone tape. Office of Naval Intelligence agents learned that the Japanese intended to murder Black and forewarned him. Kono was arrested in June 1940 along with Commander Itaro Tochibana, who ran a ring of agents. Following the arrest and Tokyo's threat to arrest American military officers in Japan, the State Department requested the US Attorney in Los Angeles not to prosecute. All were allowed to leave the US for Japan. The well-funded Japanese espionage efforts that had operated in America for several years before the war passed a high volume of intelligence to Tokyo, which compiled a 200-page encyclopedia of the US Navy and its capabilities. Although the FBI and Office of Naval Intelligence had rolled up several Japanese spy operations, one unusual opportunity was missed. British double agent Dusko Popov was sent by his German High Command counterintelligence controllers to the United States in August 1941 to set up a spy network. His collection requirements included many regarding Pearl Harbor. Unfortunately, J. Edgar Hoover, often at odds with British intelligence, dismissed Popov as an untrustworthy and immoral double agent and did not take him seriously. Someone should have been smart enough to ask why the Germans seemed to so interested in Pearl Harbor. With war raging in Europe on the night of November 11, 1940, the British Royal Navy launched a carrier-based aerial torpedo attack on the Italian fleet anchored in the bay at Taranto in southeastern Italy. The bay was shallow, so the British modified their torpedoes not to dive too deeply and hit the bottom. The attack inflicted severe damage on the Italian fleet. A Japanese delegation later studied the Taranto attack, which demonstrated the impact of naval aviation and the use of an inverted torpedo. In March of 1941, Lieutenant Takeo Yoshikawa of the Imperial Japanese Navy was assigned to the Japanese consulate in Honolulu. Yoshikawa was a spy, formerly a trainee pilot. Yoshikawa spent 4 years studying the US Navy and learning English before arriving in Hawaii. He scouted all of the military bases in Oahu but concentrated on Pearl Harbor. He occupied an apartment that overlooked Pearl Harbor, rented small planes, took the Navy's own harbor tugboat, swam extensively, and drove around the island. He relied on his memory, not writing down anything potentially incriminating, to describe the layout of facilities, the pattern of military activities, and the anchoring of ships in the harbor. He also reported on the harbor's water depth. He collaborated with the German counterintelligence agents in Honolulu, Otto and Frederick Cohen, who provided intelligence on Pearl Harbor from 1936 to 1941. Although Yoshikawa was suspected as a spy and tailed by US agents, they could not gather evidence of his espionage in order to have him expelled. The Japanese operated a radio direction finding station on Kwajalein Islands, on the former German Pacific Islands awarded to Japan after World War One, which could track US planes operating from Hawaii. By knowing patrol routes, the Japanese could screen gaps in coverage, which were helpful in planning their approach to Pearl Harbor. The Japanese had also achieved some success in reading American diplomatic codes. By November 1940, the Japanese also had an intercept team targeting the US Navy from Mexico. Japanese intelligence contributed significantly to the success of its attacks on Pearl Harbor. Its fleets approached undetected from the northwest, and area radio direction finding revealed was rarely patrolled by American planes. The targets were well identified through Lieutenant Yoshikawa's reconnaissance efforts up to December 6th. The Japanese Koko Gorai Type 91 modified torpedoes were effective against the anchored battleships in the shallows next to Ford Islands. Japanese dive bombers showed the effectiveness of penetrating bombs on capital ships. Japanese intelligence had contributed to the greatest naval defeat that the United States had ever suffered.